Hey gamers, this is Liz Davidson from Beyond Solitaire, and I am here with a very special guest with Morgane Gouyon-Rety, the designer of Pendragon. What do they call you, the mother of Pendragons? Is that your name now?
Harold Buchanan came up with that, so I kind of like it. So yeah, I'm going to use it for a bit of time, maybe. Yeah. So, that's Harold.
But you are a history buff and a fantastic wargame designer. So I guess what I ask you about first is, I was looking through the notes for Pendragon. That is your first published design. How did it feel to jump into the deep end?
I don't know. I mean, kind of, you just do it and then you realize afterwards, I guess, how big it was. It's not my first design, but it's the first one which gets released. I was very lucky to have guys, Volker Runke to start with, who has been a big support for the development of the game, actually becoming the developer toward the second half of development. So obviously that was a huge help. And then, the staff at GNT, there's not that many permanent staff, but what there is, and even the semi-permanent, they just know how to do things. So, and they let me basically do whatever I wanted, work apart. And so, no, it's been, I'm not going to say it was easy, because it wasn't, but at least what needed to be done and when and what, that was part of the structure. So and it was, so that wasn't that tough. I guess if you go self-publish and something, it would be entirely different. Mm-hmm. And that's the route I would consider at all. There might be more money, I don't know, but we don't do that for the money anyway. So honestly, just getting published is just fantastic. So, and then on top of it, people look to be like, oh, that seems interesting, and then pre-orders, and then these pre-orders turn into orders. So I'm like, wow, it's like, but truly, you come up and you have a subject matter that you don't, basically there's no game for it, so you just do your own game, and then people get interested and you actually get published, and other people come and play your game, and then you get feedback. Oh, that's fantastic. I had no idea about this. I love that. Well, great.
So it sounds like you love the entire process of game design.
Maybe not the entire process, but it wasn't that bad. It's long. That's the main thing. It's so long. But then as, Volko tells it all the time. It's like a game is never finished, it's only get published. So at some point you have to say, okay, I'm reasonably happy with what we have. I got a couple more ideas which might be, but you know what? Okay, let's draw the line here and get that, ready and at. And hopefully you draw the line at, a place that makes sense. I must say that as of today, there is nothing with Pendragon that I wish we had done differently. So far, so good.
That's good. How did you get into wargaming to begin with? From what I understand, you first made contact with Volko because you had a historical correction, which means that you must have been playing and paying attention to wargames for a while. So how did it start for you?
I've been into wargaming since I was about 10, I think.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so growing up in France, it wasn't as big as in the US, but still we had a couple shops and games. The big thing was that since most of the games were produced in the US in English, there was a language barrier, at least initially. So we mostly relied on either French productions or Italian productions. There was a fairly active Italian production at the time. There still is, but not the same scale. And all their games were like French, English, Italian, Spanish, etc. So So my very first war game was called Iliad,
Okay.
which is on the war in Troy, right? Terrible game. Terrible game, but I came to war games through history. I mean, I was always, as far as I can remember, I was completely mad about history. I learned to read because I wanted to read history books, which were everywhere in my grandparents' and parents' house. So, and I was already particularly interested in ancients. And so when I read in some, I don't know, magazine or whatever about a game on, the war in Troy, I said, yeah, I want this for, I think it was my birthday. And then I was like, but I mean, I had played games before. I mean, I was playing with other stuff. So the principle, it simply was a terrible game. That's the truth of it. And then got some games, found some guys to play with. It really kicked up, I think, when I was in engineering school was probably when it really, because there was a very active club. Basically every night, every weekend we would be playing. So we had a very active also, that was the early 1990s. We were starting to have the internet, email, stuff like this. So we were playing play by email, diplomacy, and other games. So yeah, that's how it started. And then I started building my collection of games. So yeah, it's been a long time. And then so you were mentioning Volko. So in 2014, I had been, when we were living in just outside of San Francisco at the time. And so I had started going regularly to the GMT West weekends, which were like a couple hours drive from home. And so I had actually started working on, it was not my first design project, but it was like probably the most advanced I had tried yet, which was not Pendragon. So I was trying to pitch it to GMT, getting some feedback, etc. And then that's how I discovered the coin series. And I think very initially, like many players, it was like, is this a war game? There's like colored bits everywhere. I don't understand what's going on. The map is like crowded and a mess. And the very first game was ENGN Extra on Columbia. And to be very honest with you, I mean, I was like, the theme was like, meh. So, bizarre, messy, no good theme. So I stayed away, which was a mistake, by the way, because it's a great game. And then in the second wave of coin games, there was Cuba Libre and a distant plane on Afghanistan. And that one I played in Hanford, so at the GMT weekend, I think right after it was released, if I'm not mistaken. And thankfully, in a group with some experienced players, so I could be eased into the system. And it was like, wow. Yeah, it just opened up a whole new realm of possibilities in terms of, yes, we can have multifactional, we can have pure asymmetry, we can have, interactions in so many different ways. Yeah, it was wow. And then I think Fire in the Lake was in testing at the time. So the next weekend, I actually played a playtest game of Fire in the Lake. And yes, it was like a kind of revelation. I would about a whole new domain of gaming application, of historical modeling and conflict simulation, etc. And then I remember on that very occasion, I don't know if you ever had the chance to go to a GMT weekend. I mean, these things end up very late at night. because we play and we talk and we play more and we chat some more, and you're easily in bed at 3 in the morning. And I remember one late night discussion with some friends there, and I was like, they knew I was working on actually what became Hubris. And one guy asked me, is there a game you would like to, some theme, something you would really like to design? And I was like, yeah, I would really like to do something about the end of Roman rule, particularly in Britain, but I don't know how to approach it. And then probably about, I don't know, a month later, all these things sort of percolate, and I can tell you exactly where it was. I was in my car, stuck in a traffic jam. California is famous for that. Going up toward the Caldecott Tunnel, going back home, and you've got nothing to do but think, right? And I started sort of. And I was like, okay, so the conflict in Roman Britain is really about different factions at odds at different levels, and they fight for different things, and sometimes they cooperate, sometimes they fight, and it's all a mess, and it's all like, damn, it's like a coin game. And it started like, and the thing was the jump, I would say the conceptual jump was that all the coin games to date were coin games, counter-insurgency. And there's no insurgency in Pendragon.
True.
But I saw the coin games for, I think, what they truly are, which is asymmetrical conflicts, multifactional conflicts, covers counter-insurgency, but other stuff too. And so it started to, and suddenly a lot of things started to make sense, and probably got stuck like an hour in traffic, fairly typical. And when I finally arrived home, I just went to my desk, took a sheet of paper, and started drawing. And these basic principles remained true today. So the foundation, if you will, which were really, what are the four factions, what are their relationships, on what aspects would they tend to collaborate, on what aspect would they tend to be in opposition, etc., and what would be the main drivers, I would say 90% was set on that day. Now, obviously, it was something I had been reading about and thinking about for a very long time. So it just came together that day.
So you incubated for a while, and then
with the proper tool to model it, which was the coins engine, if you will, which had been the missing part. Because you look at the situation in Roman Britain, at the end of Roman Britain, there's no way you can simulate it with a traditional war game. It's just too messy. So until we had something like Volko's coin engine, I don't think we could properly represent that situation. It's my opinion, at least.
I can't disagree with that. So you are a huge enthusiast for this period in history. Before I ask you about Hubris, what would you recommend as a book for people who are interested in this period, in the period of Pendragon, to read alongside the game to kind of enrich their experience? What's your favorite?
My favorite, but unfortunately I think it's quite hard to find. Give me a second.
Yes.
So, Edwin Pace, Arthur and the Fall of Roman Britain, the narrative history of 5th century Britain.
Mm-hmm.
This is not the most complete book. This is not the one. I mean, you won't have a full feel for the period with this book, but this is, to me, the one which presents the most interesting. I'm not saying this is the final and absolute truth, but it makes an awful lot of sense to me. Having read, you've probably seen the list of sources for Pendragon. I literally have tens and tens of books on this period. This is, to me, the one which actually I read roughly shortly before. Well, no, that's not true. 2009. But anyway, it's the one which, to me, was the most influential in shaping the basic structure of the relationships between factions, especially of the very interesting role of federati in this conflict, and especially in. I mean, I've read most everything about Arthur, at least what could be the historical Arthur. I'm not that much interested, well, a little bit, but not that much into the mythical, but it always tends to be very black and white, and being myself descended from, Breton family, so basically from exiles from Britain, I tend to obviously see Arthur as the last one who fought for us. But this book, to me, demonstrated that it was probably a lot messier than what history tells us, which is, in my opinion, makes it much more interesting, but also sort of gave me the, that's how everything sort of fell into place with the multifactional aspects, with the symmetrical aspects. So that would be the one. There's many others. I mean, I checked the Pendragon's bibliography. It's fairly extensive.
Indeed,
There's not one that has it all. That's the thing. And again, you may be more interested in like the daily life. You may be more interested in the Britannic side, in the Germanic side, etc. There's so many aspects that needs to be taken into account that I try to capture to some extent in Pendragon. But there is not just one book which has it all.
Yeah, there never is, I guess. So let's talk about, I'm pretty sure that first advanced design that you're talking about is Hubris, correct? Which is now going to be coming out soon. So why don't you tell us about it?
Right. So I always had a lot of interest for the Celtic world and Celtic history, but there is actually one period of history where I'm even more interested in that. Ancient Greece, to some extent ancient Rome, and especially what we call the Hellenistic period, which is the period which starts with the death of Alexander after his campaigns in Asia and his conquest of the Persian Empire, up to basically the Romans taking over the Eastern Mediterranean. So to me, it's fascinating in many ways, because first, it's like the epitome of Hellenic culture when it met with a ton of other great culture from the ancient world through conquest, through establishing these new kingdoms, and there was a huge fusion of cultures, of religions, of science, which I'm convinced is actually the foundation of our civilization. The Romans, except for the legal aspect, which are very, very Roman, are only the perpetrators of what the Hellenistic period did for us, both in terms of art, in terms of science, in terms of philosophy, etc. So I always found it a fascinating period, historically. And then from a gaming point of view, I actually came about this period by kind of accident. It was 1992, and at least the way Greek history is taught in France, and I'm sure it's not that different, or it was not that different in the US, was you would know everything about, the Medic Wars, the Peloponnesian War, the rise of Athens, democracy, blah, 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 and then the conquest by Philip II, Alexander's father, and then the campaign of Alexander, and then Rome. We knew about maybe Ptolemy, we knew about a few things, but it was, honestly, if you had like one paragraph in an history book, that was it. So I knew nothing of the actual political history or military history of that period. And then in 1992, so I was still in engineering school, and unfortunately it doesn't exist anymore. There was a great game magazine, not only war games, also role-playing games, that sort of thing, in France, called so in French, Casus Belli, so Casus Belli, case for war in Latin, and they had a game, most issues probably, and they had one which was called Les Diadoques. So the Diadoques was the terms in Greeks for the successors of Alexander, and it was a kind of diplomacy variant. And we looked at it with my friends who were playing diplomacy already. And we looked at it and it was like, oh, it sounds fun. I mean, it had some interesting to it. So we played it and we were like, oh, that's such a perfect balanced situation, etc. It must be completely artificial. Because we hadn't heard about any of these guys, right? But still, so when I came home and I started some digging and I realized, no, it wasn't. Obviously, it had been simplified, but no, it was based on actual facts. And I discovered, but some of my friends were with me at the time, and we were like, gosh, that's the most perfect situation for a war game that you may ever see. Because basically the situation is Alexander dies, just conquered the biggest empire that the world had ever seen at the time, and his lieutenants who are all incredibly gifted and who have a ton of experience from the campaigns throughout Asia, who have the same resources, the same means, the same military technology. There is no ideology whatsoever. It's pure personal ambition. Okay, there are some disguise of, I'm defending the interest of the young king or whatever, but it's naked personal ambition. These guys are all ultra talented, big personalities, and they fight it out for 40 years.
It's true.
And it was like, oh! It's, the closest parallel I could think of is just imagine that Napoleon actually managed to prevail in Europe, basically winning against Russia, somehow, forcing Britain to make peace, and then dies, leaving only a young heir, and you got all his marshals fighting for peace. I think that's the closest equivalent you could dream of. Huge talent, a lot of qualities, big personalities, same technology, same weapons. It's pure personal ambition. There's no ideology, there's no massacres, there's no whatever. It's perfect ground for a war game or a game like this. So that's how it started. So we started dabbling on a game on the period. Then never came to anything like a playable prototype, unfortunately. We played a lot of successors. The game by Mark Simonich and Richard Berg, I think. Both the Avalon Hill and then the GMT version. Still probably one of my preferred games, even though I could speak for hours about everything that is wrong with this game. But anyway, still a great game. And so I always had this. And then, so in 2013, I had actually been working on something else. I was trying to... there's the Ancient Wars series by Richard Berg, which has 2 volumes.
Yeah.
Right? Again, great ideas, terrible execution in my opinion, but anyway. But the ambition of this series was to recreate an operational level campaigns of the ancient world. And I was like, hey, I want to see the campaigns of the successors. So I started actually drawing by hand the maps for the entire Eastern Mediterranean all the way to Iran at the ancient war scale.
Ooh.
Yeah, I got that somewhere. But anyway, and then I was like, actually, it started this way. I was one night I was playing with a colleague of mine, who was a guy from Texas, by the way, and he played. He had played war games when he was younger, and not played for I don't know how many years. And so, as we were colleagues, I was telling him about what we were doing. So I introduced him to some of the newer games, and we had a Twilight Struggle that night. And as I was putting away the game, and I got a complicated relationship with Twilight Struggle. I admire the game and how it's polished and everything. I just hate the theme, and I hate I don't like to play it. I just admire the way it's done. Anyway, so I was like, such a great game. It's too bad it's not on a theme I actually care for. And same thing, things start coming together. And so I was like, but you know what? The late Hellenistic period, when, not the period where the kingdoms were being forged, but when they were established and fighting for supremacy, and then Rome was starting to intrude into the region. So it's like, it's a little bit like a DEFCON, but a DEFCON you can actually fight. Well, sort of. And same thing, things started coming together, and so Hubris started life as a kind of derivative of Twilight Struggle applied to the late Hellenistic period. And that's basically what I pitched to GMT that year, because I did make a playable prototype. First one I did.
All right.
And so, that's the difference between having an idea and having a project. When you can start actually playing with it, well, first thing, you immediately see what works and what doesn't work, at least 90% of it. Because if it's only in your mind, you get very complex and very clever things, but there are blind spots because you cannot test it just by, okay, I'm playing this, and why can I do, I should be able to do this. Okay, and you go back to the drawing board. And then the next thing is you can play with other guys. And then you get feedback. Because again, when you design based on what you know, and you play based on what you know. So in a way, you are not stretching the model a lot because you are a prisoner of your understanding of the historical period. You take someone from a different, comes at it for the first time, probably never heard about it, and he starts doing stuff, and you're like, hey. No, you shouldn't be able to do that. Well, where is it precluded? And then you start thinking, and you're like, okay, so they didn't do it historically. Could they have done it? If they could, that's okay. If they couldn't, then you have to do something about the rules or about, the capacities or whatever.
Sure.
So that was it. And so I was working and playing and polishing that version of Hubris for about a year. And interesting process, especially for a first-time designer. And then this idea about Pendragon came up. But my biggest concern with Pendragon was, hey, every coin system has been set in modern times or nearly modern times. At the time, there was no Falling Sky. There was, Liberty or Death was in pre-order. And even Liberty or Death to many aspects is much like a modern coin. So I was like, is that even an option? Am I crazy? Are they even going to consider going way out of, there's no insurgency, there's that sort of thing. And at the time, I didn't have a prototype. It was just a concept, a number of sheets of paper with ideas and diagrams and tables. And then in July, I think, of that year, GMT announced Falling Sky. And obviously, being French, loving Celtic history, I was like, wow, yes. Give it to me. And so, but then part of my mind was like, how? So, okay, so they are ready to go back in history. And so I contacted Mike Bertuccelli, who at the time was the coin series developer, who I knew from having met him a number of times in Hanford. So I gave him a call, and I'm like, Mike, I just saw Falling Sky. I mean, it was literally the day it was, the newsletter came out. And I said, Mike, you know what? If you need someone to do playtesting or help with, research or whatever, access to French text, or I would be delighted to help. And he was like, oh, okay, well, thanks. I'll let Volko know, blah, blah, blah. And then we start chatting, what have been you doing, blah, 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 etc. And somehow, I don't know why, I mentioned that I had been toying with this concept of a game which was actually not named Pendragon at the time. And he was like, oh, tell me more about it. Okay. It was just a concept. And so I did. And then next thing I know, I get an email from Volko saying, tell me everything about your concept. And by the way, yes, we would be delighted you helping with Falling Sky. And so I remember spending most of my summer actually doing a lot of back and forth on Falling Sky and working on Pendragon. I remember especially, I think we spent 2 weeks in France with my parents in central France. So with the time difference.
Yeah.
I would basically first thing in the morning, I would get everything which had come during the night, review it, answer, make my suggestions. Then I would switch to Pendragon. I mean, my parents hated me because I was on my computer all the time. We actually found the time with my family to go and because the place of my parents in central highlands of France is actually a couple hours drive from the site of Gergovia, one of the big battles between Caesar and Vercingetorix. For some reason, I had driven by but never actually gone and visited it. So we did that. I think our son was, so 2014, he was like 4.5. Loved it. I mean, the sites are very interesting. There's actually several locations, some very interesting archaeological digs. I mean, it was excellent. I took picture. I think one of these pictures served actually as an illustration for one of the event cards in the game. Anyway, so that was a very busy time. And then with Volko, it was like, okay, I would like to see your, not Pendragon. At the time, it had a Latin name.
Bene.
It was named, the provisional title was De Excidio Britanniae, okay? Which is basically the title of Gilda's essay, which is one of the few primary sources for the period. We found that it was too obscure, and then we went for something more.
How could that be too obscure?
De Excidio Britanniae. Anyway, so the target was like, okay, let's say, and Volko was coming to the GMT West weekend, the fall weekend, which is in October. And so the target was like, oh, let's have a prototype ready for October. Remember, we're like August.
Right.
Start from nothing. So, okay, we can try. Not to mention work and a lot of other things going on in my life. Anyway. So I do that, and then toward the end of August or early September, we're back in San Francisco, and I get a call or a message from Volko, and he's like, hey, by the way, I'm going to be in San Francisco mid-September. I'm invited to a game design convention, whatever. And by the way, you should come. And it would be great if you could show me the game, Ben. Okay. So you just cut like a month from another site very tight schedule. So anyway, I did manage to have something which was kind of playable. Well, not playable, but not complete. When Volko was in San Francisco in like mid-September, apparently he liked it. And then we had a big coin event at the GMT West weekend that October, which we actually called Coin Fest.
Oh, that's awesome.
And we were presenting. So Fire in the Lake was just recently released. We had Liberty or Death on P500. We had my game plus Kenty's game on the Philippines, also in development. I think there was another one. I mean, it was awesome. I mean, we had like a whole section. So anyway, so that's how Pendragon came to be. That's basically when Jean and Volko said, yes, we want to have it on the schedule. And when I put Hubris on the side.
Right.
For a couple of years. Yeah. So then, as I was going through Pendragon's development, I was sometimes going back to Hubris, sort of evolving, but not much. And then the more I learned with Pendragon, the more dissatisfied I came to be with Hubris as it was. And especially, I guess, I had been drifting away from the original Twilight Struggle template quite a bit already, but I realized that this template was actually kind of forcing me into a direction which was not what I wanted to put the emphasis on.
Okay.
So once Pendragon was completed, and then not right away because I went through a personal period then which stopped me for quite some time. But anyway, when I finally came back to it, I was like, I got that wrong. I mean, the period, the basic model, etc. is right, but the focus is wrong. Mm. And, Twilight Struggle in a way is a very, I might say, Marxist approach to the period. Individuals are not mentioned or in a very marginal way. The more I was thinking and reading and going back to my sources, and maybe it's wrong, but the history of the ancient world is very much driven by individual persons. Maybe it's wrong, but I don't think it's wrong. I think the structure of states, mm-hmm. the nature of political organizations, etc., was very much centered on individuals. And so that was, to a large extent, I mean, it was modeled in a way, but not in a way which put them center stage.
Right.
I felt that was very wrong. So I basically tore down everything and restarted from scratch. And so I redesigned Hubris entirely, and then I redesigned it a second time, still on the main axis, to be leader-centric. And the basis, if you will, the building block of the Hubris system is that you don't have a hand of cards like you would have in a traditional CDG. Mm-hmm. You have a court of leaders. You've got your king, and then you have his friends, which is, by the way, an historical term at the time.
Yes.
The advisors of the dynastic kings were called philoi, his friends, which goes all the way back to the old Macedonian court where they were probably truly friends. I mean, later on it becomes more of a honorific title, but still, that was the title. And so these guys, and a couple of ladies, have strengths and weaknesses. There's some stuff they're good at, there's some stuff they're not so good at, there's some stuff they actually stink awfully at. And another important characteristic is just how reliable they are. Are they loyal? Do they tend to do a lot of intrigue? And so to some extent, so instead of being, right, I got a hand of cards, and some cards are good, some cards are bad. How can I maximize the impact of the good ones and minimize the impact of the bad ones, which is what most CDGs are about.
Right.
Here it's about, okay, I got some stuff to do. To do anything, I need to appoint someone so that he goes, or she goes, and does it. And I got only a limited number of guys I can truly rely on. So it's a matter of resource management. It's like human resources. And then it should be this, decision should be, okay, well, your king usually is one of your, he's reliable. It's not going to obviously betray you, but it tends to be fairly effective. Not all of them, but most of them were. But it cannot do everything. So you've got to, to use other guys. So you need to have a secondary campaign, maybe to go crush a rebellion somewhere. This guy is very good, but he's your cousin and he's ambitious. Can you trust him with an army? Send this guy who's safe, but not so good. Maybe he's not going to lose that war, but maybe instead of crushing it in one campaign, it's going to drag on and drag resources and for a long time.
Right.
Do you have this guy has personal relationship with that city, so I want to, strike an alliance with that city. I should send him that, but he's also good at administration, and I need that task taken care of. So you have only a limited number of activations, limited number of guys, and that's the main engine of the game.
That sounds really fun.
I think it's very appropriate to the period because it was so personal in terms of power and networks. But I think this is actually true of many other time periods. And whenever I talk of this system, guys are like, oh, that could be great for, Middle Ages, or that could be great for, late Roman. It could be great for the Civil War. I think it has a lot of relevance for pretty much any period, at least until you get into a kind of industrialized conflict. Mm-hmm. Even you might make a point sometimes, but that's probably where I would sort of cut off use of such a system. But I know, for instance, Pendragon basically stops when you have this sort of chaotic, a number of small kingdoms, warlords fighting each other. And I'm thinking about doing a follow-up which would be set probably about 400 years later during the Viking Age.
Ooh, okay.
But in between, there was a lot of interesting stuff going on. And it was intensely personal. Kingdoms, we think of kingdoms like Mercia or Northumbria or Wessex or Gwynedd, but the truth is that none of these kingdoms had any sort of lasting institutions and structure. They rose and fell with their kings. When there was a brilliant or ruthless or lucky or whatever individual who probably managed to get a couple good, competent guys with him at that time, he achieved great stuff. And then he died. And usually he just crumbled as soon as he died. Yeah. So I think that would be an interesting way to approach this period as well.
I can see that. So I have an important question about Hubris.
Yeah.
Is somebody going to make solo bots for it? I know you're not a big solo player yourself, but...
No, I'm not. It's funny because we actually had an interesting discussion with Bez, our opponent, recently. And we talked about it. There is a bot in Hubris because one of the design choices I made is that the players are the Hellenistic kings. Mm-hmm. Rome is a non-player.
Ooh.
It has its own rules. One of the things I want to represent is that this was an alien power. They didn't think the same way, they didn't work the same way, they didn't go by the same rules. And this is something which, by the way, the historical kings took a long time to recognize. This is, by the way, one of the big differences why actually Rome is not a DEFCON like in Twilight Struggle. No, but the tension between the West and the East during the Cold War was actually, they understood each other very well.
Right.
And they had direct lines of communication, I mean, the red phone and that sort of thing, where they could communicate and, I would say, make sure that tension could go down by a direct communication. There was no such thing at the time. The Hellenistic kings were faced with a completely alien thing, and it took them probably at least 50 years before they started to grasp what they were dealing with and how these people were thinking. Hence a lot of things, and that's why it cannot be a player. You cannot negotiate with Rome. You cannot, there has to be an element of randomness, because originally it was very, Twilight Struggle is very deterministic, and it was wrong, because players would know exactly when to stop. I can go up to that point and not farther. Their historical counterparts could not do that. They did not have that understanding. So it has to be an element of randomness. They could know that something might draw the hire of Rome, but they were never sure. And sometimes they were completely, blindsided by what was going on. So Rome is a non-player. So how do you handle Rome? The way is that the game is a 3-player game. It could be played 2-player fairly easily. But so Rome, initially I developed a full-fledged bot with charts and logics and everything, because my fear was that players, obviously as cognizant of the historical events as I am, will know exactly what happened and would do everything they can to keep Rome out of the game, because you don't want to bring the wolf into. And so it was very clunky and heavy. It worked, but it was not fun. So someday, and I was observing how players were playing, and I'm like, I don't think I need that. So I ditched it, and instead I set a set of guidelines. So Rome at a given time, you have some cards which give you a sort of status, what the situation is in Rome. So at any given time, Rome has an agenda, and they can go through different agenda through the game. Mm-hmm. Basically, their involvement is going to grow. There is the status of their war with Carthage, because this is the time of the Second Punic War, which kind of have a big impact on whether... Yeah. And so on. And then you have general guidelines. Rome will try to do this. I've got a set of cards which I call the Roman War cards, which basically, whenever you need to have Rome activate, you draw one of these cards, and they will tell you, okay, so they get a diplomacy action, they get a campaign action, they get that many troops available, that many ships available, and that's it. Mm-hmm. They don't tell you what Rome will do. It is the player or the kingdom with the most, because kingdoms can acquire influence in the Roman Senate, just like you acquire influence on other cities. Obviously, you cannot control the Roman Senate. You can only get some degree of influence. Mm-hmm. So the player with the highest influence in the Senate at the time of the war leads Rome. Assuming, of course, that they are not themselves at war with Rome, then you go to the next one. If there is a tie, you take the players with the least victory points.
Ooh.
And he resolves Rome action using the resources under the constraints and the guidelines that the system set, but it's actually fairly small. You got like 2 cards, and then you have like half of a player head's sheet of guidelines. And it works. It works great. And my original concern that player would try to keep Rome out of, no way. Because when you are in a big conflict and you have this big bully coming, you want them to go and crush them. I mean, it works in a perfect way, and it reproduces what they actually did very well. But so it works as soon as you have 2 players.
Gotcha. Mm-hmm.
But if it is a single player, it would be a lot more complex. And then, so I'm currently, so I haven't developed a solo system yet. If there is to be a solo system, and I guess GMT will probably insist there is, because that's the trend. I want this system to be, we've seen some very interesting things happening with, Gandhi, the Arjuna system,
yes.
And upcoming All Bridges Burning, and what's coming up with South China Sea, etc., where you use cards and not so much, tables and charts and flow charts. So I definitely want something on the lighter side, if there is something. And I will definitely ask for one of the big heads good at solo systems at GMT, whether it's Vez or Urian or Jason, Bruce, to help me with that system. But the truth is that I'm not entirely certain we need one. Mm-hmm. And let me explain. There is no hidden information whatsoever in the game. Which means that the game, I tend to play solo games in God mode. I'm playing all factions. As long as there is no hidden information, that's why CDGs are a bitch in this respect, because you do have this how to handle the hidden hand. But here, there is no hidden information. So it actually works fairly fine. Same thing with the coin game. There's no hidden information in the coin game. So do you really need a solo bot? I'm not sure. Because take Pendragon. If you take the rulebook of Pendragon, I think 60% of the rulebook is the non-player rules.
Which I'm grateful for. So, well, the thing is...
What I mean is that it gives you a feel for the relative complexity of the base rules and the non-player rules. I see the non-player rules as a layer that you have to superimpose over the basic rules, and this is a lot, and it is very complex. And I just see. I'm managing the BGG page for Pendragon, so I see all the questions coming up. I would say probably 3/4 of questions have to do with non-player rules.
I believe it. But the other thing is true, though, is that solo players, at least in my experience from, I'm sort of coming towards war games from out of them, right? People tend to not want to play both sides. They want to have something to go up against. And I know that I think people who come to solo through wargaming are more used to playing both sides. I think that solo players from outside of wargaming might feel differently. If that makes sense.
Absolutely. I think you're right. I think you're absolutely right. Yes, there's definitely a kind of different sensitivity to that. I know myself. I'm not playing that many dedicated solo games. I do play some.
Mm-hmm.
I think we share appreciation for the Wars of Marcus Aurelius.
We do.
But most of these games, and one of the reasons I like this game is that when I play Wars of Marcus Aurelius, it doesn't feel, I'm not saying it's not, but it doesn't feel like you're playing against a super rigged system who does not obey any rules or the same rules by which you are playing, and which is going to make you lose whatever 90% of the time. As a player, I find this very frustrating. I want to be in a fair situation. I will give you an example. States of Siege. Some of them are pretty good, but I got one on the French and Indian War, which is, can't remember the title from VPG. This game is horrible. It will just draw enemy leaders in whatever order. You can get the very good British leaders and tons of resources at the start of the war, which is completely ahistorical. I hate this game because it has it bears no relationship whatsoever with reality or with fairness. You see what I mean? If there were an excellent, artificial intelligence against me, playing with the same rule and beating me in a fair, level ground thing, yes, I would love that. But you can't not implement that on a board game. It's just too heavy. So most of the solo games are just so heavily weighted against the player. That's either a perfect combination, sequence, or a lot of luck to win. And what's the point? If you see what I mean? It's not fair. It's not, and to me, if it's not fair, it's not fun. If it's not realistic, it's not fun. That's me.
Yeah, I think we solo players like to lose a lot. I mean, there are definitely AIs that are better and AIs that are worse, but I think as a group of people who game, like to have a low chance of winning, because then when you do win, it's like, yes! Because, I mean, if you're playing by yourself, you have to have the challenge.
But if you come from, I will say the Eurogaming, but that's probably broader than that. I think, and when you are presented with a solo system which is super tough, essentially you are solving a riddle.
But it's different every time.
If it's pure luck, then there is definitely zero interest, I think.
Yeah.
So if it's skill, then you are trying to crack the game. That's what you are trying to do. And that's fine. I mean, I'm not saying it's dumb or anything. I'm just saying it's entirely different from playing a war game. When I play a war game, when I play an historical simulation, I want to experience the dynamics, the constraints, the viewpoints of the actual persons who were involved in that. I'm not solving a riddle. I'm not trying to find, this is what Antiochus III should have done, and there's only one good answer, or maybe there's a couple answers. I have that's not interesting. If only because once you've cracked it, you're done. I want to have the richness of interactions. I want to get a feel for what constraints, what worldviews, what prejudices, etc. were shaping the way they saw the world and interacted with each other and with the world. I don't want to crack a riddle. I think that's the big difference.
I think that as solo games progress, that experience is getting better. So I was very impressed with what Wakan is able to do, for example, in PAX Premier. I think that we are, as we play more, as solo gaming develops, I do think that solo AI is getting better. I'm excited for how it's going to be. But, so we've been talking about, before I let you go, I just want you to tell me, what have you been playing recently that you are really liking?
Unfortunately, most of my game-related time recently has been devoted to Hubris and other things. Now I've started laying the foundations for the following game.
Ooh.
So I've been spending a lot of time when I'm not doing Hubris thing, because Hubris is down to the kind of systematic, mechanical, like writing the rules, double checking everything's consistent, doing the key index terms, checking references, checking it's consistent with the player heads and the event cards, etc. So it's important, but it's not a ton of fun. Let's be honest. So I need the creative freedom of starting with a new game. So I've been spending a lot of time with that. Another game set in Hellenistic times, by the way. I don't know if you want to talk about it, but
yeah, give me the scoop.
Game that okay, so the provisional title for it is Demetriad. After two historical characters, Demetrios of Phaneros and Demetrios, the city taker, son of Antigonus. So essentially, this is a game. This will be a coin game. 3-player, which will be set in the city of Athens in the late 4th century BC.
Mm-hmm.
And it's about faction politics in the midst of a global war. So essentially, the factions will be the oligarchs, the democrats, and the king. king of Macedon.
Yeah.
And they're all trying to push their own agendas. I mean, coin stuff. While the city is, so obviously, I mean, the city is no longer fully independent as it used to be, but still, the institutions and etc. still function to some extent. And there is this wider struggle between Macedon and Antigonos and his son Demetrios. And so they play a role because they are trying, to influence and to gain influence, etc. So, but Antigonos and Demetrios, again, will be a non-player thing. They won't be a player. And I'm interested in this dynamics of between the three factions. So yeah, I'm quite excited by this.
I'm excited by this. But as it stands, I have kept you a while. Morgane, thank you so much for coming on the channel to talk to me, to talk to all of us.
I know, it was fun.
And everybody, leave us some comments if you have anything to say about our conversation.
Sure, and I'll try to answer.
Happy gaming, everybody.